The pews of Willow Springs United Church were packed tight, every face marked by winter's pallor and the weight of collective grief. Outside, the wind scraped frost against the stained glass windows, but inside, the only sounds were the soft shuffle of boots, the dry rustle of hymnals, and the whisper of prayers for Deputy Samuel Keene. A pillar of the community, Samuel's loss had pulled everyone, ranchers, teachers, elders, children, into this sacred space, bound by loss and loyalty. At the front, Samuel's casket rested beneath the pulpit, draped with an American flag and a single fading blue wildflower. His mother, Ruth Keene, sat in the first row, her hands trembling in her lap. The Reverend's words floated on the cold air. "We gather to honor a man whose life was given for others." A figure shifted near the altar, a German shepherd, sable and regal, known to all as Valor, Samuel's partner. Valor had been a fixture in town for years, a silent guardian at Samuel's side. Now his presence was electric, every muscle coiled with tension. The church held its breath, and then, as the Reverend paused, Valor's head snapped up. The silence was torn apart by a single, piercing howl, a cry that was not of mourning but of alarm, wild and raw. It cut through the hymn, through the stoic faces, shattering composure. People gasped, some flinched, others tried to hush him, but Valor's eyes locked on the casket. With a sudden, desperate surge, he lunged toward it, claws skittering on the wooden floor, ignoring sharp commands from officers and Ruth's strangled plea. He reared up, pawing at the polished wood, nose pressed to one corner as if he could dig straight through. "Get him back!" someone barked, but no one dared lay hands on the canine. The room tensed, uncertain. This was not grief. This was something deeper, a primal warning. Detective Avery Quinn stepped forward, her jaw tight. For years, she'd trusted Valor's instincts. They'd saved lives together, cracked cases when logic failed. She caught the look in his eyes, focused, wild, unwavering. Avery raised her voice, steady but edged with urgency. "Wait, don't touch him." The mayor, pale and sweating, tried to intervene. "Detective Quinn, please, this isn't the time." Avery didn't back down. "If Valor says something's wrong, we listen. Open the casket." Gasps rippled through the congregation. Ruth's face crumpled, torn between faith and fear. The Reverend hesitated. The tension grew so thick it seemed the whole church might shatter. "Please," Avery insisted, voice breaking. "Trust him. Trust Samuel." The funeral director, hands shaking, released the latches. The room went silent, breaths held. Valor pressed closer, his body trembling. The lid was lifted, revealing Samuel's still form, dressed in full uniform. Valor shoved his nose in, not toward the man he'd loved, but to one edge of the jacket. What happened next would haunt the town for years, a rupture in tradition, a moment where faith and instinct collided. Outside, the wind howled and snow battered the old stone walls, but inside Willow Springs United Church, all eyes were on a single dog and the secrets his loyalty might reveal. The church had never felt colder than in that moment. The casket opened, silence falling like snow over the congregation. Valor pressed forward, nosing aside the stiff blue wool of Samuel's uniform, searching. No one moved. The mayor's hand hovered awkwardly in the air. Ruth's lips parted in dread. Avery watched, heart in her throat. At first, there was nothing but Samuel's familiar scent and the smell of wood polish and lilies. Then Valor whined, a high, quavering note, and pawed insistently at the inner lining of the jacket. A shudder passed through the crowd. Murmurs rose, uneasy, but no one dared interrupt. Avery leaned in, her hand steady even as her chest tightened. She reached into the casket, feeling beneath the folds. Her fingers met something unexpected, soft, warm, shivering. She glanced at Dr. Eloise Hart, the town's veterinarian who was already pushing forward through the stunned mourners. Carefully, Avery drew out a bundle wrapped in Samuel's faded gray t-shirt, its edges damp from breath and panic. A faint, pitiful whimper sounded. She peeled back the cloth and gasped. Nestled within, trembling uncontrollably, was a tiny German shepherd puppy, barely old enough to open its eyes, its fur slick with cold sweat, its body pressed tight as if trying to disappear. For a second, no one breathed. Then voices broke out, some in awe, others in alarm, and a few in desperate prayer. Ruth, pale as linen, staggered back against the pew. Someone dropped their hymnal. The Reverend whispered, "Dear God." Dr. Hart rushed forward and took the pup from Avery's arms. Her practiced hands swept over the tiny body. "She's hypothermic. And her breathing's shallow. I need to get her to the clinic, now." But even as she moved, the congregation remained rooted, as if the laws of physics had stopped working. This was Samuel's funeral. This was holy ground. But the puppy, this life, was real and clinging to existence by a thread. Avery looked around at the stunned faces. Does anyone know where this pup came from? How did she end up with Samuel? No one answered. Valor, still pressed to the casket, gave another low whine and licked the puppy's tiny ear. His entire body trembled. Grief, fear, love, something deeper than language. Dr. Hart wrapped the puppy in her scarf and started for the door. Avery followed, then Ruth, drawn by instinct stronger than mourning. The crowd parted, shocked into motion. Outside, the air bit with winter's teeth. The snow fell harder, thick and relentless. Avery cradled the puppy, the bundle so light it barely seemed real. "She wouldn't have survived another hour, Doctor." Hart muttered, urgency driving her to the old Ford parked at the curb. As they loaded into the car, Valor leaped into the back seat, pressing against the bundle with frantic energy. Ruth climbed in, silent, clutching Samuel's battered hat. Avery slammed the door, shutting out the murmurs, the cameras, the world. The drive to the clinic was a blur. Spinning tires, headlights slicing through whiteout, the wind howling like something alive. Dr. Hart worked one-handed, rubbing the puppy's limbs, urging her to breathe. "Stay with me, sweetheart. You've come this far." The clinic was dark and still, a single lamp casting gold onto the metal exam table. Dr. Hart moved fast. Blankets, heating pad, oxygen tank, IV fluids. Ruth stood to the side, one hand pressed to her mouth, the other clinging to her son's hat. Valor would not be separated from the puppy, pacing circles around the table, growling low at every unfamiliar sound. Avery rested a hand on his back, feeling the shuddering strength beneath his fur. The pup, named Phoenix on the spot, for her battle to rise, lay motionless but for the shallow rise and fall of her chest. Dr. Hart murmured, 3 days. She survived in that casket, with only Samuel's shirt to keep her warm, and Valor guarding her the whole time. Avery shook her head, eyes stinging. Samuel must have put her there, protected her to the very end. Ruth wept silently, tears tracing new lines through her weathered cheeks. He couldn't save himself, but he saved her. Suddenly, Valor let out a sharp bark and pressed his nose to Phoenix's side. The pup gave a tiny whimper, a thread of sound, but enough. Dr. Hart nodded. She's fighting. From outside, the first flash of red and blue lights reflected off the snow. Word had spread, and now reporters, police, neighbors crowded the parking lot, desperate for answers, desperate for meaning. Avery stepped outside, the cold slapping her awake. She faced the gathering crowd, their faces lit with phones and fear and hope. "There's nothing here but a miracle," she called out, voice steady. "Samuel gave his life for this town and for this pup. We're not letting either be forgotten." Inside, Dr. Hart and Ruth sang a lullaby, an old hymn Samuel had loved, as Valor curled himself protectively around Phoenix. Every beat of his heart seemed to urge her onward. Every breath from Phoenix felt like defiance, like the first hint of spring. The town would never be the same. Faith and tradition, order and instinct, all collided on this snowbound night. But at the heart of it all, at the heart of Samuel's legacy, was a spark that refused to die. And so, as the storm raged and the world waited, a tiny puppy fought for her life, a community prayed, and a bond deeper than words was forged in the coldest hour Willow Springs had ever known. The clock inside Dr. Hart's clinic barely moved, each second stretching and twisting as if it refused to carry anyone toward morning. The storm battered the windows with ice, sometimes shrieking, sometimes whispering, as if nature itself mourned Samuel Keene, but inside the air was feverish with hope, fear, and exhaustion. Phoenix, the name suited her now, lay swaddled on the heated exam table, her fragile body encased in Samuel's old t-shirt and layers of blankets. Valor stayed close, nose pressed to her side, shuddering with every wheeze, every faint twitch of her paws. He ignored the bowl of water Dr. Hart placed at his side, ignored the gentle coaxing of Avery and Ruth. His eyes never left the puppy. Ruth Keene moved as if underwater, each gesture slow and deliberate. She held a mug of weak tea that had gone cold, her hands shaking so badly she could hardly lift it. The lines in her face deepened as she watched Phoenix struggle for breath. Sometimes she hummed softly, old lullabies, fragments of hymns, anything to fill the terrible emptiness that Samuel's absence left behind. Avery lingered near the window, her breath fogging the glass as she stared out into the endless white. Every time her phone vibrated, police dispatches, texts from colleagues, offers of help, she hesitated before responding, as if anything she said might tip the scales between hope and heartbreak. In quiet moments she replayed the memory of Samuel's last call, the static, the sharpness in his voice, the way he'd promised to come home for dinner and never did. A sudden cough from Phoenix snapped everyone's attention back to the present. Dr. Hart hurried over, checking the pup's vitals. "Still fighting," she murmured. "She's got more grit than most grown dogs I've seen." Ruth's voice trembled. Samuel always believed in second chances. He saw things in animals that no one else could. She brushed a hand across Phoenix's tiny ears, her fingers gentle and unsure. Valor shifted, placing his muzzle on Ruth's knee. For a moment the room was a single breath, a fragile piece made of fur, tears, and the raw ache of loss. Time became a strange thing. Sometimes Ruth thought she heard Samuel's voice echoing in the quiet, reminders to lock the doors, to check on the neighbors, to say grace before a meal. Each memory sharpened the ache in her chest. She turned to Avery, her eyes rimmed red. "Did you find anything else? Anything of Samuel's? Anything that tells us why he—" Avery hesitated, then nodded. "When I unwrapped Phoenix, I found this." She held out a folded slip of paper, creased and smudged. Ruth opened it with trembling hands. "Please save her. She's a survivor." Samuel's handwriting was unmistakable, strong even in haste. Ruth pressed the note to her heart, the words breaking her all over again. Dr. Hart sank into a chair, rubbing her temples. "We do what we can. But some things are out of our hands." Avery tried to hide her frustration. "I should have seen the signs. I should have known something was wrong that night." "You did what you could," Ruth whispered. "Samuel would want you to forgive yourself." Valor whined, pressing closer to Phoenix. The pup's breathing hitched, then steadied, a rhythm so faint it seemed imaginary. Outside, the storm built to a frenzy. The clinic's generator hummed, lights flickering as if even electricity struggled to keep faith. The only certainty was the determination in Valor's eyes, the quiet hope that lived in Phoenix's every breath, and the silent agreement between three women to fight, no matter the odds. Midnight came and went. Ruth fell asleep in the chair, one hand draped over Phoenix's tiny body. Avery paced, mind racing, replaying Samuel's last days, searching for meaning. Dr. Hart called a colleague in Billings for advice, her voice low and urgent. Valor's fur rose and fell with every breath Phoenix took, his body a barrier against the cold. At one point, Avery stepped out into the hallway for air. The walls were lined with photos, rescued dogs, smiling children, Samuel grinning with Valor at his side. Avery let herself cry, shoulders shaking. She wiped her eyes and returned, more determined than ever. Near dawn, Phoenix let out a faint whimper and reached one tiny paw toward Valor. The shepherd's tail thumped softly, a sound of pure hope. Dr. Hart checked the IV, her face brighter. "She's stabilizing. If she makes it through the next few hours." Ruth began to sing again, soft, steady. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. The hours dragged on, punctuated only by the gentle rise and fall of breathing, the whisper of blankets, the steady hum of life struggling to return. When morning came, the snow was still falling, but inside the clinic, something had changed. Phoenix's breathing was stronger, her body warmer. Ruth smiled through her tears. Avery squeezed her hand. Valor finally closed his eyes, just for a moment, still pressed close. Outside, Willow Springs was quiet, the world holding its breath. But inside that little clinic, hope flickered, fragile, impossible, but real. And in that moment, surrounded by memory, grief, and the stubborn will to survive, everyone realized, as long as there was breath, there was a chance for healing, for connection, for a new story to begin. The sun crept into Willow Springs hesitantly that morning, painting long, cold shadows across the snowdrifts outside Dr. Hart's clinic. It touched the old church steeple, the shuttered storefronts, and finally the frost-laced window where Ruth Keene sat in quiet vigil, her hand resting protectively over Phoenix's fragile body. The air inside was heavy with the scent of antiseptic and old flannel. Silence stretched thin and strange, full of memories too sharp to speak aloud. Valor lay curled beside Phoenix, eyes open but distant. He barely moved except to nuzzle the pup now and then, as if reminding her to keep breathing. When the door creaked, Valor's ears perked, but his gaze was gentle, not wary, a silent invitation for company, not a warning. Ruth's fingers traced circles through the puppy's fur, but her thoughts were far away, wandering down old roads and empty corridors where Samuel's laughter used to echo. She turned to Avery, who stood at the window, her arms folded against the cold, eyes scanning the horizon. "Do you remember," Ruth began, her voice low and trembling, "the first time Samuel brought Valor home?" Avery nodded, a wistful smile flickering at the memory. "He said Valor was nothing but trouble back then, full of fire, no trust for anyone." Ruth's lips quivered with the ghost of a laugh. "He'd found him tied up behind the rail yard. Some men were teasing him, throwing bottles. Samuel, he couldn't stand cruelty. He just marched right over and untied him, said he'd answer to the sheriff later." Dr. Hart, moving quietly as ever, glanced up from her records. "That dog wouldn't let anyone near but Samuel. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't drink. Then one day, Samuel sat with him all night in the barn. By morning, Valor was sleeping with his head on Samuel's boots. After that, they were never apart." Outside, wind rattled the clinic's old panes. Inside, stories unfolded, sometimes out loud, sometimes in glances and half-remembered gestures. Ruth spoke of afternoons spent watching Samuel and Valor train in the fields, the bond they'd built through patience and stubbornness. She remembered the way Samuel would kneel to whisper in Valor's ear before every shift, the trust in their shared silence. Avery's voice was softer now. "There were times I envied him. I thought if I worked harder I could be like Samuel, calm, sure, but he had something I never did. He could see where a soul was hurting, human or animal." Ruth squeezed Avery's hand. "That's why he couldn't leave Phoenix behind. He always took in the lost ones." A shadow crossed Avery's face. "I wish I could have saved him. I've got cases in my head, people I couldn't help. Every mistake." She broke off, voice cracking. Dr. Hart busied herself with the IV, but her eyes shone wet. "We all carry regrets. There are animals I couldn't heal, families I couldn't comfort. But we do what we can, with the time we're given." Silence fell. Valor shifted, resting his muzzle on Ruth's lap, eyes half closed but aware of every movement, every tear. Avery finally spoke. "I found Samuel's journal. It was in his car, under the seat. He wrote about his last night, how he found Phoenix abandoned near the woods, barely breathing. He brought her to the patrol car, used his own coat to warm her. Even when he was hurt, he tried to shelter her with his body." Ruth's voice broke as she clutched Samuel's hat to her chest. He couldn't walk away, not from her, not ever. Dr. Hart sat beside Ruth, sharing the warmth of a single lamp, the hush of loss blending with gratitude. He gave her a chance. He gave us all a chance, in a way. Outside, the first sounds of the waking town drifted in. Distant engines, the scrape of snow shovels, someone calling out to a neighbor. Life went on, as it must. But inside the clinic, the past and present mingled, braided together by sorrow and love. Valor's eyes met Ruth's, deep and soulful. He shifted, pressing his head into her hand as if saying, "We're still here. We go on." Avery studied the note she'd found wrapped around Phoenix, Samuel's plea scrawled in hurried script. She read it again. Please save her. She's a survivor. And the words seemed to burn with a new urgency. Phoenix is fighting, Avery whispered. She's got Samuel's stubbornness. Ruth smiled through her tears. That's what will save her. That's what saved all of us. For a time, the clinic was silent except for the soft hum of the heater and Phoenix's unsteady breaths, but it was a different silence now. Not absence, but presence. Not an ending, but a beginning born from pain and devotion. Dr. Hart gently checked Phoenix's heartbeat, her fingers steady now. She's holding on. Give her a little more time. The women sat together, united in loss, hope, and the quiet determination that Samuel had passed on to them all. Valor dozed, finally, head on Ruth's lap, trusting her to guard the fragile spark he and Samuel had protected. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside, the night receded. There would be new trials, fears, regrets, the long work of healing. But in that small room, a story continued, stitched together by the bonds of remembrance, the grace of forgiveness, and the promise of a single battered puppy's first breath of mourning. By dusk, Dr. Hart's clinic had become something more than a place of healing. It was now the beating heart of a community standing vigil. The news of Phoenix's fight for survival, and the miracle that had happened at Samuel Keene's funeral, had spread like wildfire through Willow Springs. Lanterns and battery lamps glowed outside the windows, the parking lot filled with townsfolk in thick coats and snow boots, clutching blankets and thermoses, their breath hanging in the winter air like little prayers. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy, sacred, and charged with a quiet tension. Ruth Keene sat on a folding chair next to Phoenix's table, humming an old hymn. Her voice was thin but clear, threading through the hush like a lifeline. Each verse was a promise, a way to keep faith when hope seemed paper-thin. She reached down, her calloused hand gently stroking Phoenix's side, feeling each quiver, each shallow breath. Avery hovered nearby, watching everything with a protective edge. Every time the door creaked, every time the puppy whimpered or the machines beeped, her heart stuttered in her chest. She wanted to fix things, to push back against the limits of fate, but all she could do was stand sentry, shoulders squared, jaw tight, ready to fight the world if she had to. Valor never left Phoenix's side. His body curled around her, shielding her from cold drafts, his warmth a living barrier against the chill. When someone entered the clinic, he would lift his head, ears forward, eyes full of warning and longing. But when Phoenix whimpered, he pressed his muzzle close, humming a low, vibrating sound, half growl, half comfort. The two were tied together by something primal and unbreakable. The hours crawled. Ruth's voice trembled but never faltered. The crowd outside swayed to her melody, some joining in softly, their voices weaving through the cracks in the window pane. Someone started passing out candles, and soon a ring of light flickered in the darkness, defying the storm that still raged beyond the edge of town. Dr. Hart, exhausted but relentless, worked through every option. She monitored Phoenix's temperature, adjusted her IV, and whispered encouragement with a gentle urgency. Every so often she'd step out to update the gathered crowd, her words brief but brimming with gratitude for their faith and patience. But hope is a fickle companion. As midnight approached, Phoenix's breathing grew ragged, her tiny chest rising in desperate, shallow gasps. Dr. Hart frowned, her hands shaking as she adjusted the oxygen mask. She's not responding. Her body's just too small, too tired. Her voice broke, a rare crack in her steady facade. Ruth's eyes glistened. She reached for Valor, her hand settling on his back. Let him stay with her, please. Maybe he's the only thing keeping her here. Dr. Hart hesitated. The clinic had its rules, its logic, but nothing about this night was normal. She nodded, stepping aside. Do it. Avery helped Ruth lift Phoenix from the sterile metal table, tucking her carefully onto the blanket beside Valor. The dog pressed in tight, wrapping his body protectively around her. For a moment, it was almost as if Samuel's spirit filled the room, a surge of love and stubbornness that defied the weight of death. The puppy shuddered, then let out a weak whimper. Valor licked her ear, humming again. Phoenix's tiny paw reached for his fur, trembling but clinging. Dr. Hart watched, breath caught in her throat. "Come on, little one. Stay with us." Outside, the crowd had gone silent, listening for any sign, any miracle. Ruth gripped Avery's hand, her voice cracking as she sang another verse, the words breaking and healing all at once. The clock ticked. The storm pressed against the windows. And then, barely audible, Phoenix let out a stronger, clearer cry, her chest rising more steadily, her breathing eased, her body going limp not from surrender, but from release. A hush fell inside and out. Dr. Hart knelt beside the two dogs, her voice shaking. "She's stabilized. She's fighting." A cheer rose from the crowd outside, growing into a wave of hope that seemed to push back the storm itself. Strangers embraced, tears glistened on weathered faces, and lanterns burned brighter. The entire community felt it, a collective sense that something holy had happened, born not of a single act, but of the stubborn persistence of many hearts refusing to let go. Avery slumped against the wall, the tension in her body finally giving way to tears. Ruth knelt beside Valor, whispering, Thank you for not letting her go." Dr. Hart leaned back, exhausted but smiling for the first time that night. "I've never seen anything like it. I can't explain it, but maybe some things don't need explaining." The vigil became a celebration. Some people sang. Others simply stood in silence, holding hands, sharing warmth. Ruth promised Samuel through silent prayer that she would care for Phoenix as fiercely as he would have. Inside that little clinic, with frost on the windows and candles burning outside, hope returned. Not just for Phoenix, but for everyone who needed to believe that faith, loyalty, and love could conquer even the darkest night. The morning after Phoenix's first night of real sleep, Willow Springs was no longer united by hope alone. The story of Samuel's funeral, the pup in the casket, and Valor's strange, desperate intervention had spilled beyond the snowbound streets and fence lines of town. It moved through text messages, radio stations, Facebook posts, and the tongues of every gossipy neighbor for miles. Some called it a miracle, others called it madness. By sunrise, the little clinic buzzed with an undercurrent of tension. Ruth set out coffee for the growing stream of visitors, well-wishers, old friends, and a few faces she barely recognized. Some came to drop off blankets and toys for Phoenix, others to sneak a curious look at Valor and whisper about what they'd heard. The local paper ran a front-page headline, "Dogs Cry, Halt's Funeral, Puppy Found Alive in Deputy's Casket." Avery felt the shift first. As she sipped her coffee and checked her messages, a link popped up on her phone, an online petition demanding her suspension from the force for violating protocol and disrupting a sacred ceremony. She scrolled, her stomach tightening as she read anonymous accusations, some vicious, others simply confused. Did she know something about Samuel's death she wasn't sharing? Why had she insisted on opening the casket? Outside, a small knot of protesters had gathered, some carrying hand-painted signs. "Respect the dead. Justice for Samuel. No more spectacles." The air was thick with rumor. Ruth heard the whispers when she ran into the post office. "It was all for attention," someone muttered. The whole thing felt staged. She clutched her purse tighter, refusing to let their words in. Valor seemed to feel it too. He stood guard by Phoenix, hackles bristling when strangers pressed too close to the clinic windows, even when Dr. Hart led him out for a quick walk. He glanced back anxiously, eyes searching for the pup he'd sworn to protect. Inside, Dr. Hart did her best to keep the mood calm. She spoke to Ruth in gentle tones. "People just don't know what to do with miracles. They want to believe, but fear always gets in first." She knelt by Phoenix's crate, checking her temperature, running a soothing hand down her spine. Phoenix was stronger now, eating tiny mouthfuls of food, her body still trembling but determined. Avery found herself pulled in all directions. One moment she was fending off local reporters, the next fielding calls from the police chief, who wanted answers and, more importantly, reassurance that his department hadn't become a circus. "You did what you had to," he said quietly over the phone, "but this town's hungry for someone to blame." Avery heard the fatigue in his voice and wondered if she'd ever sleep a full night again. Then came the breaking point. An email arrived, security footage from Samuel's patrol car the night he died. Avery sat alone in the clinic's tiny staff room, phone clutched tight, watching the grainy video unfold. Samuel's voice was calm as ever. "There's a stray. Looks like she's been out here a while." The footage showed him coaxing a small, terrified puppy from the ditch, wrapping her in his jacket, cradling her close as he called for backup. Suddenly headlights flashed. Another car, unmarked, no plates, barreled down the road. There was shouting, a struggle, gunfire. Samuel shielded Phoenix with his own body until the very end. Avery's heart thundered in her chest. She watched Samuel's hands, gentle, steady, fearless, protecting life even as his was slipping away. When the screen faded to black, she sat for a long moment, the world outside her growing impossibly still. When she stepped back into the main room, her face was pale but resolved. She called for Ruth and Dr. Hart, pulling them into the circle of lamplight as Valor pressed close to Phoenix. Avery played the video for them, the images blurry but the message crystal clear. Ruth cried openly, her sobs fierce and cleansing. "He saved her," she whispered, clutching Samuel's hat to her chest. "He died doing what he always did, protecting the lost." Dr. Hart wiped her eyes and looked at Avery. "You need to share this. The town deserves to know the truth." The decision was made. Avery posted the footage online, attached a simple message. "Samuel Keene died saving Phoenix. Whatever you believe, miracle or not, this was a man who gave everything for others. Let's honor that, not tear each other down." By nightfall, the mood in Willow Springs shifted again. Some people apologized for their harsh words, dropping off cards and casseroles at the clinic. Others doubled down, unwilling to let go of suspicion. But the crowd of protesters thinned, and the steady hum of kindness, neighbors holding candles, kids making drawings for Phoenix, strangers offering prayers, slowly grew louder. Valor, for his part, watched every newcomer with sharp eyes, but when a child knelt beside Phoenix and offered a tiny stuffed bear, the old dog finally let out a sigh, settling back onto his blanket. For the first time in days, Ruth felt the weight in her chest ease just a little. Maybe Faith could survive even this storm. That night, as snow fell softly and the clinic's lights glowed against the dark, Willow Springs stood divided, but not broken. At the center, one puppy slept soundly, surrounded by the hearts she'd changed, her future written in the hands that refused to let her go. The storm arrived with no warning, the kind that erased the horizon in a matter of minutes and made the world outside Dr. Hart's clinic vanish into swirling white. Willow Springs was accustomed to winter's fury, but this blizzard was the worst in years, wind lashing so hard that streetlights flickered and power lines groaned under the weight of ice. For a time, the whole town was cut off from the world, trapped in a hush broken only by the moan of the wind and the faint, stubborn hum of generators. Inside the clinic, the light was dim and golden, thrown by battered lanterns and the last emergency battery lamps. Dr. Hart moved quietly, exhaustion etched in every line of her face as she checked Phoenix's temperature again and again. The puppy was stable but so small, so fragile, a miracle on borrowed time. Ruth pulled an old quilt up around her shoulders and Phoenix's tiny body. She pressed her cheek to the puppy's head and murmured old prayers, her voice steady even as her eyes shone with fatigue. Valor lay curled around the two of them, his thick fur a living blanket, every breath a soft promise that nothing would get past him. Avery watched the storm through the clinic's frosted front window, her jaw set. She could see the power lines swaying, sparks flaring in the distance. She knew it wouldn't be long before the generator failed. "We need more heat," she said, worry sharp in her voice. "If Phoenix gets cold now..." Dr. Hart glanced up, her brow furrowed. "The church has generators. There might be one in the basement we can borrow." Avery didn't wait for another word. She tugged her coat tight and darted out into the blizzard, her boots crunching through knee-deep snow. The wind nearly knocked her off her feet, but she pressed forward, her heart pounding in her ears. Each step was a fight, a promise to Samuel, to Ruth, to Phoenix, that she would not let hope slip away. She reached the church at last, her face stung red, her eyes streaming. The old building was dark except for a single flickering candle in the window. Inside, a handful of townsfolk had gathered, taking shelter as the storm raged. Among them was Cole Rankin, a traveling journalist stranded by the snow, his camera in hand. He looked up as Avery stumbled in, his face open and curious. "We need a generator," Avery panted, wiping her face with numb fingers. "For the clinic, for the puppy." Cole nodded, rising to help. Others joined, voices hushed but determined. "We'll bring it," someone said, grabbing heavy coats and boots. The little rescue party formed quickly, neighbors united not by duty, but by something deeper, forged in the fire of shared hardship. Back at the clinic, the world was shrinking around Ruth and Dr. Hart. The generator sputtered, its light flickering dangerously. Phoenix shivered, her body so small it seemed to disappear inside Samuel's t-shirt. Ruth sang softly, voice cracking, desperate to keep the darkness at bay. Valor, sensing the deepening cold, curled tighter around the pup, his breath warming her fur, his body a barricade against the night. Dr. Hart placed hot water bottles wrapped in towels along Phoenix's side, her hands steady even as fear gnawed at her resolve. "Come on, sweetheart," she whispered. "Hold on just a little longer." The door burst open and Avery stumbled in, covered in ice, followed by Cole and two townsfolk lugging the heavy generator. "We got it," Avery called, her voice raw with hope. In minutes the room glowed warm again, the hum of the machine loud enough to drown out even the storm. Cole set up his camera in a corner, quietly documenting what he called the bravest night in Willow Springs. He live-streamed the scene, the shivering puppy, the battered canine curled protectively around her, Ruth's song weaving through the noise. Across the country, thousands tuned in, sending messages of hope and donations to the clinic. Phoenix. The miracle trended on social media, prayers and encouragement pouring in from strangers who'd never set foot in Montana. Ruth wiped tears from her cheeks as she read aloud the first messages. "For Samuel, for Phoenix, for all of you, don't give up." For the rest of the night, the clinic was filled with a strange, beautiful energy, fear and hope tangled together, the past and the present swirling like the snow beyond the windows. Outside, the blizzard howled, but inside, people and animals huddled together, sharing warmth, memory, and stubborn faith. Avery, exhausted, slumped against the wall and let herself believe, for the first time in days, that maybe, just maybe, they would all make it through. At the deepest part of the night, when even the wind seemed to pause, Phoenix opened her eyes and whimpered softly. Valor's tail thumped once, and the puppy's mouth closed around his paw, seeking comfort. Ruth hugged them both, whispering, "You're safe now." "We've got you." Cole captured the moment in a single silent frame, the image of a community coming together, of hearts refusing to surrender, of light blooming in the darkest storm. As dawn approached, the blizzard began to ease, the wind settling, the sky softening to a deep gray. Ruth pressed her lips to Phoenix's tiny head, tears of relief and gratitude flowing freely. In that moment, Willow Springs felt like the safest place on earth, not because the storm had passed, but because the hearts inside the little clinic refused to break. No matter what waited beyond the snow, hope had taken root, and it would not be moved. The storm surrendered slowly, dawn breaking not with a triumphant burst of light, but a gentle easing, wind quieting, snow tapering off, the whole world washed in soft, pearl-gray glow. The town of Willow Springs, half buried in drifts, looked ghostly and new under the hush. The church bell, silent for days, chimed faintly in the distance, its tone muffled but clear. The night was over. Inside Dr. Hart's clinic, the change was immediate. The air, once taut with fear and exhaustion, loosened with every passing minute. A shaft of gold sunlight broke through the window, catching the edges of blankets and casting long, hopeful shadows across the floor. Phoenix lay nestled in the crook of Ruth's arm, breathing steady and strong, her tiny paws stretched, toes splaying, as if reaching for something she'd only just remembered. Her fur, still patchy, still dull, seemed to catch the light in a way it hadn't before. She blinked, her eyes clearer and brighter, and lifted her head for the first time. Valor watched, unmoving except for the tremor in his tail, which wagged slow, then faster, as Phoenix steadied herself. Dr. Hart blinked away tears, her hands shaking with relief as she checked the monitors. Her fever's broken, she whispered, almost in disbelief. She's breathing on her own. In that moment, the exhaustion in her bones turned to something sharp and bright. Pride, hope, a sense of wonder she hadn't felt since she was a girl. Ruth let out a sound, a laugh, a sob, a prayer, her voice breaking the spell. She cupped Phoenix's delicate face in her hands, pressing her cheek against the puppy's head. "You did it, baby," she whispered, voice thick with gratitude. "You made it." Avery, who hadn't slept in what felt like a lifetime, slumped into a chair and covered her face with her hands, letting out a shaky breath. All the worry, all the guilt, all the tension melted away. She felt Samuel with her, not as a memory, but as something present and living in this new day. Outside, townsfolk began to gather, their faces weary but glowing with the hope that had carried them through the storm. Candles flickered in the early morning air, coffee and casseroles passed from hand to hand. And they stood in silence, watching through frosted windows as the miracle unfolded. Cole Rankin, the journalist, pressed go live on his camera. His voice cracked with emotion as he narrated for thousands now watching across the country. Here in Willow Springs, a little dog named Phoenix just stood up on her own. After all this town has been through, after all the pain and loss, this is what hope looks like. This is what a miracle feels like. Inside, Valor slowly rose, his body stiff from hours spent shielding Phoenix. He nudged her, nose to muzzle, and she yipped softly, recognizing her guardian. Ruth let her go, just enough for Phoenix to wobble to her paws. She stumbled, legs awkward and unsure, but then she looked up at Valor and stood tall, chest out, tail wagging. The room exploded with applause, cheers muffled by tears. Avery wiped her eyes and looked at Ruth. "He'd be so proud," she whispered. "Samuel, he'd be so proud of you. And her. Doctor." Hart nodded, her professional detachment lost in the raw joy of the moment. This is why we do what we do. Someone knocked at the door. The mayor entered, hat in hand, his face softened by sleeplessness and humility. He stepped forward, clearing his throat. "We've just received word. The governor's office wants to recognize Samuel Keene, posthumously, for his heroism. And Ruth, the town council has agreed. Phoenix is yours, officially. And Valor too, if you'll have him." Ruth pressed a trembling hand to her heart, tears flowing freely. "Thank you. Thank you, all of you." Valor, sensing the shift, nudged Ruth's hand and then lay his head on Phoenix's back, sighing deeply, a sound of peace, of home. The two of them, joined by pain and perseverance, now belonged to each other and to the town. Cole caught every second on camera, Ruth and Avery embracing, Dr. Hart laughing through her tears, the townsfolk crowding close, hands on hearts, candles held high. The chat filled with hearts and prayers, strangers across the country bearing witness to the power of second chances. The day unfolded with quiet celebrations, neighbors bringing food, children crafting welcome home banners for the clinic. Phoenix, still shaky but defiant, became the center of a small, sacred festival. Valor walked with her, step by careful step, teaching her how to move, how to trust the world again. That afternoon, as the sun finally broke free from the clouds and sent diamonds sparkling across the snow, Ruth cradled Phoenix in her arms, Valor pressed close at her side. She whispered a promise. "You're safe. You're loved. You're part of us now." Cole's live stream ended with the entire town gathered outside the clinic, the church bells ringing in the clear air, the sound rolling out across the plains. For one brief moment, Willow Springs was whole. The losses they'd suffered were not erased, but something new had grown in their place, something fierce and fragile, as real as any miracle. Avery slipped outside, her heart finally light, and watched as Phoenix and Valor curled together in the patch of sunlight by Ruth's feet. She knew that Samuel's legacy, of service, of sacrifice, of never giving up on the lost, had found a way forward. Inside the warmth of the clinic, amid the scent of coffee and old quilts, hope burned bright, refusing to die. And all around them, the world thawed, the storm behind them, the future full of light. Months slipped quietly past in Willow Springs. Winter's grip loosened, then vanished, and the bitter cold that once pressed in on the town faded into memory. Spring brought color back to the prairie, yellow wildflowers sprouting where the snowdrifts had been, green grass rolling over Samuel Keene's grave in the churchyard, birds singing again from the eaves of Dr. Hart's clinic. Inside the clinic, life was different now. Phoenix had grown in the space of a single season. Her paws no longer trembled when she walked, her coat sleek and golden under the morning sun. She followed Valor everywhere, shadowing his every move. If he lay by Ruth's feet, she curled beside him. If he ran the fence, she ran just behind, learning every contour of the land and every subtle shift in the wind. The old canine watched her with patience, nudging her back when she got too bold, sharing warmth and strength with every touch. Ruth found her days filling up in ways she never expected. She'd started volunteering at Dr. Hart's, first to help with Phoenix, then with other lost or broken animals who came through the door. She set out food for strays, washed muddy paws, sang old hymns to kittens in their sleep. The pain of Samuel's loss never disappeared, but it softened, leaving room for something else: purpose. When townsfolk dropped by, Ruth greeted them with a smile that felt real, not forced. Her laugh, once rare and brittle, returned in bursts that surprised even her. Avery, too, changed. After the blizzard and the vigil, she refused to let Samuel's story be forgotten. She met with the mayor, the police chief, and community leaders to launch a canine outreach program. Samuel's name on every banner, his values in every lesson. Local kids, some wary of dogs and others wild with love for them, now crowded the churchyard every Saturday, learning how to care for animals, read their body language, and train them with kindness. Avery taught them not just about dogs, but about courage, about standing up when it was hard, about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Valor and Phoenix became more than symbols. Every week, Ruth and Avery took them to the Willow Springs nursing home, where lonely residents waited for the soft sound of paws in the hallway. The old dog, now gray-muzzled but steady, leaned his head into trembling hands, accepting every pat with gentle dignity. Phoenix brought chaos and laughter, licking faces, rolling in laps, scattering the heavy shadows of memory. For those brief visits, the past hurt less and the future seemed possible again. The town itself changed too. The controversy from those long-ago days, protests, suspicion, divisions, melted in the face of what Phoenix had come to represent. That spring, the city council, urged by Ruth and Avery, established Light from the Ashes Day, an annual celebration of resilience and loyalty. The first year, townsfolk gathered in the square with lanterns and candles, each flame representing a loss, a hope, or a second chance. Ruth stood at the front, Valor at her side, Phoenix prancing restlessly at her feet, and spoke words she never dreamed she'd find. Family isn't just blood. Family is who we fight for, who we forgive, who we heal with, one day at a time. Dr. Hart, who once believed her heart was too tired for miracles, found herself swept into new purpose. She expanded the clinic's rescue work, coordinated with Avery's canine program, and gave talks at the school about kindness to animals and one another. More than once, she caught herself pausing in the doorway, just watching the scene. Ruth tending a dog's bandage, Avery coaching a child, Phoenix and Valor tumbling in the grass, and felt a deep, unfamiliar peace. Avery found healing too. She still wore the badge, still carried the weight of every case she couldn't solve. But the pain of Samuel's absence no longer paralyzed her. She let herself grieve, then let herself begin again. The note Samuel had left, "Please save her. She's a survivor," became her mantra. Each time Phoenix came barreling into the room, all big ears and oversized paws, Avery saw not just the dog Samuel saved, but the future he'd wanted for everyone who called Willow Springs home. The lessons ran deep and quiet, like spring water beneath hard ground. Ruth and Avery talked often about what it meant to heal, not just to patch wounds or mend bones, but to risk loving again after loss, to open their doors to new people, new animals, new beginnings. They learned that the deepest grief could become the root of something lasting if they let themselves believe in connection, even after everything was broken. The kids in town, once more likely to be glued to their phones than look each other in the eye, started swapping stories of Phoenix's escapes, Valor's heroics, and Dr. Hart's kindness. Some, inspired by what they'd seen, began volunteering at the clinic or visiting the nursing home on their own. For the first time in years, Willow Springs felt less like a collection of old wounds and more like a place with a future. At the end of one long spring day, as the sun slid behind the mountains and the grass shimmered with gold, Ruth watched Phoenix and Valor running side by side across Samuel's favorite field. She smiled, tears in her eyes but no pain in her chest, and whispered to the wind, "We're still here, Sam. We're all still here." And somewhere, in the quiet that followed, it felt like the world answered back, not with words, but with the simple, steady rhythm of hope returning, one heartbeat at a time. Summer came soft to Willow Springs, settling over the prairie in waves of gold and green. The days stretched long and easy. With every sunrise, the scars of that brutal winter faded a little more, though the memory of it and the miracle it left behind had already become part of the town's story. In the center of Willow Springs Park, beside the church and the winding creek, a crowd gathered on a bright Saturday morning. Flags fluttered, children darted among the trees, and the scent of wildflowers and cut grass hung in the air. At the heart of it all stood Ruth Keene, Avery Quinn, Dr. Hart, and a pair of German shepherds, Valor, now graying but still proud, and Phoenix, the once fragile pup grown strong and radiant. This day marked the dedication of a statue, Samuel Keene cast in bronze, hand resting gently on Valor's head, Phoenix at his feet. Around the base, the inscription read, "Faith, courage, second chances." The townsfolk fell silent as the veil dropped, revealing the monument to applause and tears. Ruth stepped forward first, her voice trembling but sure. "This isn't just a statue, it's a promise." Samuel believed that love and loyalty could change a life, and he proved it, even in his final hour. This is for him, and for everyone who ever gave something of themselves for another. Avery followed, her badge gleaming in the sun. She spoke not only as a deputy but as a friend. "Samuel taught us that courage isn't just what you do in a crisis. It's what you do every single day, showing up, refusing to let fear or grief keep you from helping, loving, and believing in what's right." Dr. Hart added, "We lost a lot, but we gained more. A family, a community, a belief in something greater than ourselves. Phoenix and Valor showed us that healing is real, that kindness spreads." The mayor, face solemn and proud, invited the town's children to place wildflowers at the statue's feet. As they did, the story came alive. Phoenix nuzzling into the flowers, children laughing, Valor settling at Ruth's side with a satisfied huff. The years would pass, as they always do, but this moment would linger. Phoenix became more than the miracle pup. She was a healer herself now, visiting schools and nursing homes with Valor and Ruth, offering comfort where words sometimes failed. She learned, as Samuel once taught, that true strength isn't measured in muscle or bravado, but in the willingness to protect, to forgive, and to hope. Avery expanded the K-9 outreach program in Samuel's name, offering new training and opportunities not just for dogs, but for troubled youth who needed purpose. The town's annual Light from the Ashes Day became a tradition. People gathered in the square, each carrying a candle or lantern, each sharing a story of loss, of redemption, of unexpected family. The fires glimmered through the night, testaments to a community that would not be broken. Dr. Hart's clinic became the soul of Willow Springs. She never turned away an animal or a person in need, her team growing with every year, her heart never again closed off by grief. She often looked out her window at the statue, a reminder that hope is worth the pain and that the greatest legacies are those made of love and sacrifice. Through all these seasons, Ruth grew older. Her hair silvered, her steps slowed, but her spirit only grew stronger. On quiet afternoons, she would sit beneath Samuel's statue, Phoenix's head on her lap, Valor resting nearby, and watch the town bustle with life. Sometimes she caught sight of a lonely stranger pausing by the monument, tracing the inscription with trembling fingers, finding the courage to begin again. The statue became a place of small rituals, children leaving flowers each spring, couples posing for photos, elders sharing stories with new arrivals. It became a symbol not just of what the town had survived, but what it had become, a haven for the wounded, the lost, and the hopeful. Ruth knew, deep in her bones, that this was Samuel's true legacy, not a name etched in stone, but a spirit alive in every act of kindness, every bond formed between neighbors, every second chance granted. She understood finally that love, dogged, stubborn, and true, could outlast even death, and so the seasons turned. Phoenix, once rescued from the grave, became the rescuer in turn. Valor, gray-muzzled and slow, was honored as a legend in his own time. Avery, Dr. Hart, and Ruth remained pillars in the community, their hearts linked by what they had lost and what they had found. The children of Willow Springs grew up beneath the gaze of the statue. Every spring, they returned with new flowers, new stories, and sometimes new hurts of their own. They learned by living that real family is chosen as much as born, that hope is a discipline, and that courage is the refusal to give up on the living, even when the world feels cold and unforgiving. And always, at the edge of the park, in the shadow of Samuel, Valor, and Phoenix, there was a sense that nothing good is ever truly lost, that out of grief, greatness can grow, that the smallest act of love can echo through generations. The American spirit, Ruth realized, was not just in flags or hymns or statues. It was in every stubborn act of faith, every hand extended, every door opened, every living thing given a chance to heal and belong. The legacy of love lived on, in Willow Springs and far beyond.